Good evening, everyone. My name is Riley Brazell, and tonight I'll be discussing family violence in rural areas. So, first off, let's start by saying family violence is also referred to as intimate partner violence, and it includes rape, physical assault, stalking, emotional manipulation, or a combination of those things. What I found is that 30 to 60% of families where domestic violence or child abuse is present are more likely to experience both forms of abuse. I also found that these, from the CDC, that victims who have experienced a lifetime of violence, of domestic violence, child abuse, things like that, are more likely to have poor physical health, have headaches, chronic pain, things such as that. Children with battered mothers are also more likely to experience adverse childhood experiences, which can lead to a wide variety of health problems as well. Finally, rural areas have a higher concentration of individuals that are 65 or older, and 1 in every 10 living at home experience abuse every year. So let's talk about some characteristics of violence that are for them: rural masculinity, self-reliance and privacy, lack of perpetrator accountability, and complex financial arrangements. Let's start with rural masculinity. It can sometimes be justified as part of a men's dominant or patriarchal role in the family. It can also be used to hide internalized male violence such as suicide, bullying, and homophobia. I'm also going to skip to lack of perpetrator accountability. So in rural areas, if the abuser has a high standing or a visible role in the community, they can be less likely to take those accusations seriously, or for members of the community to be willing to act on those accusations. Let's talk about the theoretical framework. I chose systems theory that involves ecological systems and family systems. I chose to use family systems for this study. So family systems, what that actually is, or what it means, is that what affects one individual can affect the entire family, and what affects the entire family can affect each individual member. So no event is isolated just to the abuser and the victim. Family violence can have emotional and physical impacts on all members. So the way that you can look through this lens is that emotional trauma and behavioral patterns are passed down generation to generation. So let's talk about the society's influence on family violence. Reporting abuse and seeking services can challenge anonymity and confidentiality due to the extensive knowledge that everyone has of each other's lives. It can also amplify the gossip in the town, and it can increase marginalization and stereotyping of victims, which can lead to victims being silenced because of the stereotyping, because of the gossip, and because any services that they want or any reporting that they do, it's probably not going to be, or it's going to be a lot harder to be confidential. So let's talk about some challenges in rural areas. So as we already discussed, the lack of anonymity is a challenge. Another challenge is limited resources. So they might not have adequate access to child care, job placement, support groups, things like that. Also, another one that I thought was interesting that I found was gun ownership. So a lot of members of a rural society own guns, much more than in urban societies. So violence can intensify greatly, and gun ownership can it makes things more deadly, as we know. Some more challenges are geographical isolation. So not only do they not have the services that they need in the town that they are in, they can be a great distance from the services that they need in another town. It also, if they don't have police department in their town, it can take police a lot longer to get to their point of residence or wherever they're needing the help. And lastly, being in rural areas, you can have limited access to telephone or internet services, which just exasperates the issue. So another article I found was on COVID-19 and family violence. This was during the first shutdown, so it's more estimating of things, but it estimated that 15 million cases of violence would occur with each additional 3 months of lockdown. So lockdown meant that people were forced to be at home together. So there was an increase of togetherness. There was no school, no work, and no excuse to leave the house. So you're kind of trapped in there, especially if you aren't even working remote and you don't have any work. So that increased family stress, which can lead to an increase in family violence. So let's talk about some current programs that are in place. The three that I found, they were all the ones that I found were very interrelated. They fed into one another, things like that. But the one that I want to start with is Family Violence and Prevention Services Act. This was enacted in Congress in 1984. It funds over 1,500 domestic violence shelters, and it resulted in 3 different hotlines. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, Strong Hearts Native Helpline, and Love is Respect. So the next program type of thing we're going to talk about is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. This, to me, is kind of the mother of all domestic violence services because it is available 24/7. They offer legal help. It's just a giant database for services and for people they have a whole section on identifying abuse, which I thought is extremely important. And the last one we're going to discuss is Texas Family Violence Program. So their website said promote self-sufficiency, safety, and long-term independence of adults and child victims of family violence and victims of teen dating violence. They provide a list of shelters in each city throughout Texas. They include the number for the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and they include definitions for different types of family violence and teen dating violence. In conclusion, as we have seen, there are some big problems with violence in rural areas. There is also a cyclical effect due to the transmission of emotional trauma and behavioral habits. We also saw how COVID-19 impacted domestic violence, and that there is a great resource out there, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is available 24/7 and is a great database for resources. And that is all I have. So thank y'all very much for listening, and have a good night.